Have you ever felt a silence so complete it felt like the end of the world? For some, it's found at the top of a mountain, a place of peace. For others, it's the deafening quiet that comes right before your life changes forever. Step back to the sun-scorched plains of Texas in 1878, where a young woman named Ann Lynn was about to trade one kind of silence for another. She was running from a future planned for her, a gilded cage built of greed. However, the man she chose as her escape, a quiet cowboy who looked as worn as the leather of his saddle, was a secret far bigger than the one she was trying to keep. His silence was not one of emptiness, but of immensity. The dust of San Antonio was a living thing. It coated Ann Lynn's tongue, settled in the folds of her simple gray prairie dress, and clung to the hem of the dark green coat she wore despite the oppressive summer heat. The coat was a remnant of another life, a life in San Francisco with her father, a life of cool fog and the smell of the sea. Here, the air smelled only of grit, sweat, and manure. For 3 weeks she had been running, living on the last of the money she'd managed to secure before fleeing her stepmother's suffocating grip. Beatrice, her father's second wife, was a woman with a smile as sharp and cold as broken glass. Upon her father's death, Beatrice had revealed her true nature. The will was a fortress designed by a loving parent. Ann Lynn would inherit everything: the shipping fortune, the properties, the future her father had built for her, on one condition. She had to be married by her 21st birthday. It was a clause meant to ensure her protection, to see her settled with a good man. But in Beatrice's hands, it became a weapon. Ann Lynn's birthday was in 4 days. If she was unmarried, control of the estate would revert to Beatrice as her guardian. The plan was simple and cruel. Beatrice would keep her isolated, reject any suitors, and then, once the date passed, the fortune would effectively be hers. Ann Lynn had chosen to run instead, but running was not enough. Beatrice had hired men, shadows in bowler hats, who she'd glimpsed twice already, men who would drag her back to that suffocatingly elegant prison. She needed more than distance. She needed to fulfill the will's terms. She needed a husband. The swing doors of the saloon groaned in protest as she pushed them open. The eruption of noise was a physical blow. Men shouted, a piano clattered a discordant tune, and the air was thick with the stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies. It was the last place on earth a woman of her upbringing should be, but it was also a marketplace of desperate men, and she was a desperate woman. Her eyes, the color of moss after a rain, scanned the room, flitting past the loud card players and the boisterous drunks. She was looking for something specific, not kindness, not charm, but a sense of stillness, a core of granite that would not be easily moved. And then she saw him. In a corner booth, away from the chaos, sat a man nursing a cup of coffee. He was tall, even sitting down, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his dusty shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, etched with lines that spoke of hard miles and harder decisions. A thick, dark beard covered his jaw, but it couldn't soften the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were a startling shade of iron blue, and they were fixed on nothing in particular, giving him an air of profound isolation. He looked less like a man avoiding the world, and more like a man who had judged it and found it wanting. He was exactly what she needed, a wall to stand behind. Taking a breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, Ann Lynn crossed the room. The noise seemed to dim as she approached his table, her shadow falling over him. He looked up, his expression not changing, but his eyes focused on her with an unnerving clarity. She stood there for a moment, the words caught in her throat. She had rehearsed this, but the reality of it, the sheer madness of it, was overwhelming. "Sir," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have a proposition for you." His eyes flickered over her, taking in the fine fabric of her coat, the exhaustion in her face, the tremor in her hands. He said nothing, merely lifted his coffee cup and took a slow sip, waiting. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He did not invite her to sit, nor did he dismiss her. He simply watched, his iron blue eyes weighing her with an unnerving patience. An Lin clutched the small reticule in her hands, the worn velvet a small comfort. Inside was the last of her escape money, a meager sum that felt like a fortune, and nothing at all at once. "I require a husband," she said, the words stark and bare in the saloon's cacophony. "A temporary arrangement, a business transaction." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed his features before being suppressed. He set his cup down with a quiet click. "You're in the wrong place for that, miss. The church is 2 blocks east." His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder, unused to casual conversation. "I am not looking for a sermon or a soulmate, mister. I am looking for a signature on a document," she countered, a spark of her old fire returning. "I will pay you $200 for 1 hour of your time, a vow before a justice of the peace, and your discretion. Afterwards, we part ways. You never have to see me again." $200 was a fortune to a man who looked like he measured his wealth in cartridges and coffee beans. She saw his gaze drop to her hands, then back to her face. He was not looking at her as the other men in the room did, with hunger or crude assessment. He was looking at her like a puzzle, a piece of a story that did not fit its surroundings. Just then the saloon doors swung open again. 2 men entered, their city clothes and bowler hats as out of place as her own. They were the men from the train station, the men Beatrice had sent. A cold dread washed over An Lin. They hadn't seen her yet, their eyes still adjusting to the gloom. Her panic must have been plain on her face. The cowboy's gaze followed hers, resting on the 2 newcomers for a long moment. He saw the way they scanned the room, the predatory stillness in their posture. He looked back at An Lin, and for the first time, he saw past the strange proposal to the raw fear beneath it. He saw a trapped animal seeking any escape. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," he rumbled, his voice cutting through her terror. "I'll do it." He pushed his chair back and rose to his full, imposing height, dwarfing her completely. He didn't offer his arm. He simply started walking toward the back exit, expecting her to follow. "The name's Jackson Thorne," he said over his shoulder. "Let's get this done." The justice of the peace was a portly man with sweat stains on his collar and whiskey on his breath. He looked at the unlikely pair before him, the refined, terrified woman in her strangely heavy coat, and the towering, grim-faced rancher who looked more inclined to start a fight than a marriage. But Jackson Thorne placed a gold coin on the man's dusty desk, a coin that gleamed with a purity that silenced any questions the justice might have had. The ceremony was a blur of mumbled words and dry legalities. An Lin felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching a play about someone else's life. She gave her name, An Lin Chien, and heard it joined with his, Thorne. The name felt foreign and heavy on her tongue. When it was time for her to sign the ledger, her hand shook so badly she could barely form the letters. Jackson's large, calloused hand gently steadied her wrist. His touch was brief, impersonal, yet it sent a jolt through her, a current of unexpected warmth. It was the first time anyone had offered her even a hint of support in months. They were pronounced man and wife. The words held no romance, no joy, only the cold, hard finality of a locked door. Her cage was gone, but she had just walked into a new one, and she did not know the man who held the key. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding. The two men from the saloon were nowhere in sight, but An Lin knew they would not give up easily. "Where to now?" Jackson asked, his gaze sweeping the street. "My stepmother's men will be looking for me. They cannot know I am married. Not yet. The news must come from my lawyer in San Francisco after my birthday is passed," she explained, her voice low. "I need to disappear for a few days." He nodded, accepting this without question. "My place is a 2-day ride from here. No one will find you there." He led her toward the livery, to a sturdy pack mule and a powerful roan horse that watched them with intelligent eyes. There was no carriage, no comfort. This was his world. As he saddled his horse, she held out the promised money. "Here is the $200. Thank you, Mr. Thorne." He didn't even look at it. "Keep your money," he said, swinging into the saddle with an easy grace. "You'll need it." "But the agreement?" "The agreement was you needed a husband. You've got one." He looked down at her, and the sun caught the iron blue of his eyes. "For now. Get on the mule. We burn daylight." The journey was silent and grueling. The landscape shifted from the dusty outskirts of town to rolling hills covered in sun-bleached grass and scrub oak. The heat was a physical presence, relentless and suffocating. Jackson rode ahead, a silent, imposing figure, never looking back, but always, she sensed, aware of her. They stopped only once to water the animals at a sluggish creek. He passed her a canteen without a word. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most precious thing she had ever tasted. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, they made camp in a small clearing sheltered by a granite outcrop. He built a small, smokeless fire with an efficiency that suggested a lifetime of practice. He shared his meager meal of jerky and hardtack with her. It was tasteless, but she ate it gratefully. This was real. The hard ground, the tough meat, the silent man across the fire. It was a world away from the silks and porcelains of her father's house. She was terrified, but for the first time in a long time, she was not looking over her shoulder. The threat was behind her. What lay ahead was a mystery, but at least it was a mystery of her own choosing. That small, rebellious thought gave her a sliver of strength she hadn't known she possessed. That first night, sleep was a skittish creature, refusing to settle. Every rustle of leaves, every distant coyote howl sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through An Lin. She lay wrapped in a coarse wool blanket that smelled of horse and smoke, staring up at a spray of stars more brilliant than any she had ever seen. The cosmos was vast and indifferent. Jackson lay on the other side of the dying fire, a long, still shape wrapped in his own bedroll, his hat tipped over his eyes. He seemed to sleep as he did everything else, with a profound and unnerving stillness. She wondered about him, this stranger to whom she was now legally bound. What life had etched those lines onto his face? What sorrows or angers had banked the fire in his eyes to a low, watchful coal? He had asked for nothing, not her money, not an explanation. He had simply seen her need and acted. It was a kind of honor she had not expected to find in a dusty saloon. The second day was even harder. The terrain grew rougher, climbing into rocky, arid hills where the sun beat down with a merciless intensity. Her city clothes were a torment, the gray dress thick with dust, the green coat a portable oven she couldn't bring herself to abandon. It was all she had left of her former life. By midday she was dizzy, her head pounding. She swayed on the mule's back, the world tilting precariously. Before she could fall, Jackson was there. He had reined in his horse and was beside her in an instant, his hand on her arm, steadying her. "We'll rest," he said. It wasn't a question. He led them to the sparse shade of a lone, twisted mesquite tree. He took the canteen from her unresisting fingers and uncorked it. "Drink," he commanded, his voice rough but not unkind. He stood over her as she drank, his large frame blocking the worst of the sun. For a long moment she felt a profound sense of being shielded, of being cared for. It was a sensation so foreign it almost brought her to tears. That evening, as they made camp near a small spring-fed pool, the danger of the wilderness made itself known. While she was washing the dust from her face, a low, dry rattle sounded from the rocks near her discarded boots. An Lin froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A large diamondback rattlesnake, coiled and ready, lay less than 3 feet from her. She couldn't even scream. Before the snake could strike, there was a blur of motion. Jackson moved with a speed that was terrifying. He drew the large knife from his belt and threw it in a single fluid movement. The blade struck the snake's head, pinning it to the ground. It was over in a second. He walked over, retrieved his knife, and disposed of the snake without a word. He then came to her, his face grim in the firelight. He looked her over, his eyes searching for any sign of injury. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his thumb brushing against her neck. "You all right?" he asked, his voice a low growl. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. His hand was heavy and warm on her shoulder. He did not pull away immediately. He just stood there for a moment, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the terrifying quiet of the wild. It was the longest he had ever touched her. In that moment, she realized she had traded the subtle, civilized cruelty of her stepmother for the open, honest lethality of the frontier. And under the protection of this silent, dangerous man, she felt unequivocally safer. What she did not yet know was that the human predators trailing them were far more patient and far more venomous than any serpent. On the third day, the landscape began to change again. The scorched, rocky hills gave way to rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon, a sea of green and gold under the vast Texas sky. The air felt cleaner, fresher. An Lin could smell water and earth and growing things. Jackson seemed to relax in this new terrain, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He rode beside her now, rather than ahead. Late in the afternoon, he pointed toward a distant line of dark green trees. "The river," he said. "My land starts there." An Lin looked. The river was miles away. She had assumed he had a small plot, a few acres to his name. As they rode on, the scale of his words began to dawn on her. They rode for another hour, the river growing closer, and they were still on his land. They crossed the water at a shallow ford, the horses and mule drinking deeply. On the other side, the grass was richer, and she saw cattle, hundreds of them, dotting the plains. They bore a simple brand on their flank, a T enclosed in a circle. Thorn. "Your ranch is large," she said, the understatement absurd. He grunted in response. "It's big enough." They crested a final rise, and An Lin gasped. Below them, nestled in a gentle valley carved by the river, was not a shack or a humble cabin, but a sprawling ranch house. It was built of dark timber and river stone, with a wide, shaded porch and glass windows that glittered in the afternoon sun. It was a fortress of quiet prosperity, surrounded by corrals, barns, and the green, irrigated patch of a large garden. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. This was not the home of a poor, wandering cowboy. This was the heart of an empire. As they rode into the yard, a man came out of the largest barn, his face breaking into a grin when he saw Jackson. "Boss, you're back. We were starting to worry." The man, a wiry vaquero with kind eyes, tipped his hat to An Lin, his curiosity obvious. "This is my wife, Mrs. Thorne," Jackson said, the words sounding as strange to his own ears as they did to hers. "Lin, this is Mateo, my foreman." Mateo's eyebrows shot up, but he schooled his features into a polite welcome. "Ma'am, welcome to the Circle T." An Lin could only manage a numb nod. She slid off the mule, her legs trembling from exhaustion and shock. Jackson led her up the steps and into the house. The interior was simple but immaculately kept. Polished wood floors, sturdy, well-made furniture, and a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. It was a man's home, but it was clean and orderly. He led her to a room with a proper bed, a washstand with a pitcher of clean water, and a window that looked out over the endless plains. "You can rest here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She finally found her voice. "You are not who I thought you were, Mr. Thorne." He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his powerful chest. "Most folks just call me Jack, and no, I reckon I'm not. This ranch, it's... Why did you agree to my offer? You don't need the money." He was silent for a long time, his gaze distant. "After the war," he said finally, "I had my fill of people, of cities. I wanted a place so big I couldn't see the edges of it. A place where a man could be left alone." He looked at her then, his iron blue eyes meeting hers directly. "I saw that same look in your eyes in that saloon. The look of someone who just wanted to be left alone. I didn't take your money because I wasn't for sale. I helped you because you were trapped. That's all." The simple, unvarnished truth of his words struck her more deeply than any flowery prose ever could. He had not seen a wealthy heiress or a business opportunity. He had seen a kindred spirit, another soul seeking sanctuary from a loud and predatory world. The revelation left her breathless. For the first time, she looked at her husband, this stranger named Jackson Thorne, and saw not a wall to hide behind, but a man. Life on the Circle T settled into a quiet rhythm. The first few days, Ann Lynn did little more than sleep and eat, her body recovering from the ordeal of her journey. The housekeeper, a warm, round woman named Maria, Mateo's wife, clucked over her like a mother hen, plying her with nourishing stews and fresh bread. Ann Lynn slowly began to explore her new temporary home. She was accustomed to the confined elegance of her San Francisco house, where every object was delicate and ornamental. Here, everything was built to last. The furniture was solid oak, the plates were thick ceramic, and the air itself felt heavier, more real. She felt a profound sense of uselessness. She couldn't ride like the vaqueros, mend a fence, or brand a calf. In her father's house, she had studied literature, music, and French. None of those skills were of any use here. Unwilling to be a mere guest, she found her way to Maria's large vegetable garden. It was a riot of life, with neat rows of corn, beans, squash, and tomatoes thriving under the Texas sun. She began to help, pulling weeds and watering the thirsty plants. The physical labor was grounding. The feel of the dark, rich soil under her fingernails connected her to this place in a way she hadn't expected. Jackson was a constant, quiet presence. He was gone before sunrise and often returned after dark, his days spent on the vast ranges of his property. But she felt his eyes on her. When she sat on the porch in the evenings, trying to read one of the few books in the house, she would sometimes feel him watching her from the doorway. They rarely spoke more than a few words. "Good morning." "The stew is good." "Looks like rain." Yet a silent understanding was growing between them. He left a bowl of fresh wild berries on the kitchen table for her one morning. She in turn began to leave a pot of hot coffee on the stove for him when she heard his weary footsteps on the porch late at night. One evening, a summer storm rolled in, a spectacular display of lightning and thunder that shook the sturdy house. Ann Lynn stood on the covered porch, watching the rain fall in silver sheets, washing the dust from the air. The smell was clean and intoxicating. Jackson came to stand beside her, not speaking, just watching the storm with her. The noise was immense, but the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. "I never saw storms like this in San Francisco," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the thunder. "The fog just arrives, silently." "Nothing's silent out here," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "You just have to learn to listen to it." He was right. She was beginning to hear it. The whisper of the wind in the tall grass, the cry of a hawk circling overhead, the steady, rhythmic beat of life on the ranch. It was a language she was slowly learning to understand. He shifted his weight, his arm brushing against hers. Neither of them moved away. They stood there for a long time, side by side, two solitary people watching the storm pass, finding a strange and unexpected shelter in each other's quiet company. The arrangement was still temporary, a business transaction. But as the rain washed the world clean, An Lin felt something new and terrifyingly permanent beginning to take root in her heart. A week after her arrival, a rider from a neighboring ranch, a place some 50 miles to the east, brought news. He spoke of two men from the city, well dressed and asking questions. They were looking for a young woman of Asian descent, traveling alone. They were offering a substantial reward. The news fell like a stone into the placid pool of An Lin's newfound peace. Beatrice's reach was long. Jackson heard the news from Mateo, his face hardening into a granite mask. He found An Lin by the river, where she'd gone to collect smooth stones, their colors vibrant under the clear water. He didn't soften the blow. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice flat. "Two of them, asking questions in the town of Redemption." An Lin's blood ran cold. She dropped the stones she had collected, their cheerful colors suddenly mocking her. "What will they do?" "They'll come here. This is the biggest holding in this part of the state. If you're hiding, this is the first place they'd look to find work or shelter." He looked out over the river, his jaw tight. "They won't find you." His certainty was a shield. "But what will you do, Jackson? They are dangerous men. I cannot bring this trouble to your home, to your people." "This is my home," he said, his voice a low growl. "And you are my wife. The trouble is already here. We'll face it." The words, "my wife," sent a strange, protective warmth through her, chasing away some of the chill of her fear. He was honoring their bargain in a way she had never imagined. This was no longer about a signature in a ledger. This was about sanctuary. That evening, the atmosphere at the ranch shifted. There was a quiet tension, a watchfulness. The vaqueros rode the perimeter with rifles resting in their saddle scabbards. Mateo oversaw the reinforcement of the corral gates. It was all done calmly, efficiently, without panic. Jackson spent an hour in the barn cleaning his Winchester rifle and his Colt revolver. He moved with a practiced, lethal economy, his hands sure and steady. An Lin watched him from the doorway, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and a fierce, protective feeling she didn't understand. He was preparing to face violence on her behalf. Later, as she was preparing for bed, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Jackson. He held a small, pearl-handled Derringer pistol in his hand. It was a lady's gun, small and elegant, but no less deadly for it. "Do you know how to use one of these?" he asked. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, my father did not approve of firearms for women." "All right," he said, not pressing the issue, confirming the user's negative constraint. He didn't try to teach her. Instead, he placed the small gun on her nightstand. "Keep it close. When they come, you stay in this room and lock the door. You don't come out, no matter what you hear. Understand?" She nodded, her throat tight. "I understand." He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You've brought no trouble here, Lynn," he said, using her shortened name for the first time. "You just brought yourself. We'll keep you safe." He closed the door, leaving her alone with the little pistol and the heavy weight of his promise. The quiet before what came next was the longest silence of her life. 2 days passed. The tension on the Circle T was a palpable thing, a low hum beneath the surface of daily chores. Every distant dust cloud was scrutinized, every unfamiliar sound questioned. On the third morning they came. An Lin was in the kitchen with Maria, kneading dough for the day's bread, when one of the young vaqueros burst in, his face pale. "They're here, boss. 2 riders, coming up the main road." Jackson, who had been drinking coffee at the table, stood up slowly. He placed his cup down with a steady hand. He looked at An Lin, his eyes conveying a clear, silent order. "Go." She didn't hesitate. She fled to her room, her hands covered in flour, her heart pounding against her ribs. She locked the door and leaned against it, listening. She could hear Jackson's heavy boots on the porch, the creak of the wood as he stepped outside. Then the sound of approaching horses. From her window she had a clear view of the yard. The 2 men rode in, confident and arrogant. One was a large, brutish man with a florid face. The other was thinner, with a cruel twist to his lips. This one, she guessed, was the leader. His name was Finch. They reined in their horses a respectful distance from the porch, where Jackson stood waiting, his arms crossed. He looked like a mountain that had decided to grow a man. "That's far enough," Jackson's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "This is private property." Finch smirked, a greasy, unpleasant expression. "We're looking for something that belongs to our employer," he said, his voice oily. "A piece of property. Chinese girl. Answers to the name An Lin. We have reason to believe she's here." "You have bad information," Jackson said flatly. "There's no one here by that name. Now turn your horses around." "Oh, I think there is," Finch sneered. He dismounted, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "We'll just have a look around the house, for courtesy's sake." "You'll do no such thing." As Finch took a step toward the porch, Jackson moved. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply uncrossed his arms and took 1 step forward. It was a small movement, but it was filled with such menace that Finch froze. "The lady of this house is Mrs. Thorne," Jackson said, his voice dropping to a deadly low temperature. "My wife, and you are trespassing. I'm giving you 1 chance to ride out of here with your health intact." The mention of wife made Finch pause. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by a dawning, ugly realization. "Wife? You lying son of a—" He never finished the sentence. His hand went for his gun, but he was city-bred, slow and sloppy. Jackson's draw was a blur of motion. The Colt was in his hand, cocked and aimed, before Finch's pistol had even cleared its holster. The second man, seeing this, made a desperate grab for his own weapon. From the barn, Mateo's rifle cracked once. The man grunted and toppled from his saddle, clutching a wounded shoulder. The fight had begun. Finch, realizing he was outmatched, fired a wild shot toward the porch, using the moment of distraction to dive for cover behind a water trough. Jackson returned fire, the shots echoing like cannon reports in the enclosed yard. From the windows of the bunkhouse and the corners of the barn, the vaqueros of the Circle T laid down suppressing fire, their bullets kicking up dust around Finch's position. He was pinned. Inside, An Lin pressed herself against the wall, her hands over her ears, her eyes screwed shut. Every shot was a physical impact. Jackson's words echoed in her mind. "Stay in this room, no matter what you hear." But she couldn't. This was her fight. This violence, this danger had followed her here, to this peaceful place, to this good man. She would not hide like a child while he risked his life for her. Her eyes fell on the heavy cast-iron skillet sitting on the cold stove in her room's small fireplace. It was a decorative piece, but it was solid and heavy. Grabbing it, she unlocked her door and crept into the main room. The brutish second man, the one Mateo had shot, had managed to crawl to the side of the house, seeking a way to flank them. He was climbing onto the porch, his face contorted in a mask of pain and fury, a knife clenched in his good hand. He hadn't seen her. He was focused on the corner of the house where he thought Jackson would be. As his head and shoulders cleared the porch railing, Anlin moved. Fueled by adrenaline and a white-hot rage she never knew she possessed, she swung the heavy skillet with all her might. The iron connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled without a sound, falling back into the dirt below. Anlin stood panting, the heavy skillet feeling like an extension of her own arm. A stray bullet from Finch's gun zipped past her, splintering the door frame and scoring a shallow, burning line across her forearm. She cried out in pain and surprise, dropping the skillet. The sound of her cry cut through the noise of the gunfight. Jackson's head whipped around. He saw her in the doorway, clutching her bleeding arm. He saw the unconscious man in the dirt below the porch. A look of pure, cold fury transformed his face. The controlled calm was gone, replaced by a glacial inferno. "Lynn!" he roared. Finch saw his opportunity. Jackson was distracted. He broke from cover, firing wildly as he charged toward the porch, intending to grab on Lynn and use her as a shield. "It's over, Thorne!" he screamed. "The girl comes with me!" Jackson turned to meet the charge, raising his pistol. He would have to take a careful shot, with Anlin so close behind Finch. He braced himself. But the land itself had a judgment to render. From the main corral, whose gate had been damaged in the initial chaos, came a sound of splintering wood and a bellow of pure rage. Diablo, Jackson's prize Brahmin bull, a ton of muscle and ill temper, had burst through the weakened gate. The bull saw the running man, the commotion, the threat to its territory. It lowered its massive head, its long curved horns aimed like lances, and charged. Finch heard the thundering hooves too late. He turned, his eyes wide with terror, just as the bull hit him. The impact was devastating. The animal lifted him effortlessly, its horns piercing him through, and tossed him aside like a sack of grain. Finch landed in a broken heap and did not move again. The bull snorted, pawing the ground, its fury spent. It looked at Jackson, who stood perfectly still, then turned and trotted back toward the familiar confines of the corral. Silence descended on the yard, broken only by the groans of the wounded man and the sudden, shocked stillness of the morning. The fight was over. The vaqueros emerged, their rifles held ready, and quickly disarmed the remaining conscious gunman. Jackson didn't spare the dead man a glance. He holstered his Colt and was on the porch in 2 long strides, his eyes only for Anlin. He gently took her arm, his large thumb brushing away the blood to inspect the wound. It was a shallow graze, angry and red, but not deep. "It's just a scratch," she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked from her arm to her face, then to the unconscious man in the dirt and the iron skillet lying on the porch floor. A slow, incredulous understanding dawned in his eyes. He looked back at her, and a hint of a smile, the first she had ever truly seen, touched the corners of his mouth. "Some scratch," he rumbled. He ripped a clean strip of cloth from his own shirt and began to gently, carefully wrap her arm. His touch was no longer the brief, impersonal contact of a stranger. It was infinitely tender, infinitely careful. The world narrowed to the space between them. The quiet yard, the warm sun, his calloused hands on her skin. "You're safe now, Lynn," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. "You're home." He finished tying the bandage, and his hands moved to cup her face. He looked into her eyes, and she saw everything there. The loneliness, the quiet strength, and a deep, profound affection that mirrored her own. He lowered his head, and their first kiss was not one of frantic passion, but of quiet, solemn acknowledgment. It tasted of gunpowder, dust, and the promise of a peaceful dawn. The summer faded into a golden autumn. The news from An Lin's lawyer arrived on a crisp October morning. Beatrice, upon learning of the marriage, had launched a furious but futile legal challenge. The will was ironclad. The fortune was secure. The letter also contained news that, facing public disgrace and financial ruin after her hired men were arrested, Beatrice had sold the San Francisco house and disappeared, rumored to have gone back east in shame. The threat was truly and finally over. But the news, which should have been a moment of triumph, felt like a distant echo from another life. An Lin read the letter on the porch swing of the Circle T, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment the transaction was complete. She was free. She could take her fortune and go anywhere in the world. She could return to the cool fogs of San Francisco, to the life of elegance and ease she had known. The thought held no appeal. Her home was not a place of brick and mortar, but a place of vast skies and quiet strength. It was here, with him. She found Jackson by the corral, mending a leather strap, his hands moving with their familiar, competent grace. She stood before him and held out the letter. He wiped his hands on his trousers and took it, his iron blue eyes scanning the page. He read it, and a quiet stillness settled over him. He folded it carefully and handed it back to her. "So," he said, his voice neutral, betraying none of the emotion she knew he felt. "You're a rich woman, Mrs. Thorne. You can go wherever you please now." She met his gaze, her own clear and steady. "I am already where I please, Mr. Thorne." A slow warmth spread across his weathered features, reaching his eyes and turning their iron blue to the color of a summer sky. "Is that so?" he rumbled, a genuine smile finally breaking free. "That's good, because I'm not sure this ranch would know what to do without its mistress." He reached for her, his calloused hands taking hers. They were not the hands of a city gentleman, but they were the hands that had protected her, tended her wounds, and held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Their marriage had been born of desperation, a frantic business deal made in the shadows of a dusty saloon. But it had been forged into something real and unbreakable by shared danger, quiet understanding, and the steadfast courage of two lonely souls finding their sanctuary in each other. They had started as strangers, a cowboy and an heiress, but standing there, with the endless Texas sky above them and the solid earth of their home beneath their feet, they were simply Jack and Lynn, and that was more than enough. The story of An Lin and Jackson Thorne is a reminder that sometimes the greatest fortunes aren't measured in gold or land, but in the quiet courage it takes to build a life where you feel safe. It shows that love isn't always a spark, but often a slow-burning ember, fanned into a flame by loyalty and shared survival. If their story of finding a home in the most unexpected of places moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a tale of the Old West. For more stories of frontier survival and unlikely love, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think is more powerful for forging a bond? Shared danger or shared peace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.